The battlefield reeked of blood and smoke. Jorund the Red stood among the dead, his axe heavy in his grip. The battle was won, but at what cost? His brothers in arms lay scattered like broken dolls across the ravaged land. The cries of crows echoed through the crimson-stained field, picking at the flesh of the fallen. Jorund wiped the sweat and grime from his face, his body aching with wounds both seen and unseen. He was alone. The battle had taken everything from him. No ships remained, no banners still flew. The sea was far to the west, and the land ahead was a mystery. He had no choice but to walk. The land turned strange as he wandered, hunger gnawing at his stomach. A thick mist rolled in, swallowing the world in gray silence. He pushed forward, his instincts screaming at him to turn back. But there was nothing to return to. He had to move forward. Hours passed, or perhaps days. Time slipped away in the mist. Then, through the fog, he saw it. A village, untouched by war. The houses stood tall. The torches burned bright, and the scent of roasted meat drifted through the air. It was as if war had never touched this place. A group of villagers approached him, their faces serene and welcoming. A traveler, one of them, an elderly man with silvered hair, said with a warm smile, "Come, you must be hungry." Jorund, wary but desperate, followed them. The villagers led him to a great hall where food and drink were laid before him. Meat, bread, honeyed mead. He ate with the hunger of a starving wolf. As he drank deep, he noticed something strange. None of the villagers bore scars. No wounds, no wrinkles of age. Even the oldest among them had clear, bright eyes. The children laughed, their voices carrying an eerie tone as if they had laughed that way for centuries. Days passed. He felt stronger. His wounds healed unnaturally fast. But unease grew within him. He never saw anyone enter or leave the village. The mist never lifted. The villagers always smiled, always kind, but something about them felt wrong. One night, as the village slept, Jorund crept toward the edge of the mist. He needed to know what lay beyond, but as he stepped forward, a whisper curled around his ears. Jorund, he spun, axe in hand, but there was nothing, just the mist, thick and unyielding. He took another step. "You belong here now." His breath caught in his throat. The whisper was not one voice, but many, layered upon one another like waves crashing against the shore. He turned back toward the village, and his blood ran cold. The villagers stood in the mist, watching him, their eyes too bright in the darkness. "You cannot leave," the silver-haired elder said, stepping forward. His voice was gentle, but there was a weight behind it, an undeniable finality. Jorund tightened his grip on his axe. "I am no prisoner." The elder sighed, a look of deep sadness crossing his face. "We all thought the same." Jorund did not wait for an explanation. He ran, the mist thickened, pressing against his skin like unseen hands. The whispers grew louder, turning into pleading voices, then laughter, then screams. His vision blurred. His legs felt heavier with every step, as though the mist itself clawed at his flesh. He pushed forward, desperate to escape. Then suddenly, he was back at the village gates. The villagers stood waiting. "You cannot leave," the elder repeated. Jorund's breath came in ragged gasps. He turned and ran in another direction, past the houses, through the fields. The mist swallowed him whole, and yet each time he found himself returning to the same place. The village, the smiling faces. Panic clawed at his chest. "What is this place?" he demanded. The elder stepped forward, placing a hand on his shoulder. His grip was cold. "A place outside of time." Jorund recoiled. "A prison," a home. A scream ripped through the night, not of a man nor beast, but something far worse. The villagers turned as one toward the sound. Their expressions did not change. Their smiles never wavered. Jorund raised his axe. What was that? The elders sighed. The ones who do not accept. Before Jorund could speak, something moved in the mist. A shadow, tall and misshapen. A figure with hollow eyes and a mouth stretched unnaturally wide. The thing lunged. Jorund swung his axe, but the blade passed through it like smoke. Pain bloomed in his chest. Cold, unbearable pain. He fell to his knees, gasping. The mist coiled around him, whispering in his ears, filling his mind with memories that were not his own. Lifetimes passed in the blink of an eye. He saw himself in the village, laughing with the others, drinking mead. He saw the village 100 years ago, 1,000. He saw warriors before him, men who had tried to leave, men who had failed. The mist whispered one final truth. He had never left the battlefield. He was one of them now. Jorund the Red stood among the villagers, his axe light in his grip. He smiled, welcoming the next traveler who stumbled through the mist, another lost soul seeking refuge. The whispers in the mist called to them both. They would never leave. Jorund's mind wavered between past and present. He remembered the clash of steel, the blood on his hands. He remembered his brothers dying beside him. But those memories felt distant now, as though they belonged to another man. Still deep inside, something resisted, a fire yet smoldered within him. He watched the new traveler, a younger warrior with wide eyes and a hesitant step. Jorund recognized the look. He had worn it once himself. The young man ate and drank, laughed nervously at the village's endless hospitality. He too would begin to wonder, and then he would try to leave. Jorund clenched his fists. Was this truly his fate? A greeter of the lost, a warden of the damned? He tried to speak, to warn the man, but the mist stole his voice. It always did. Yet, deep within, something rebelled. He turned his gaze toward the mist, toward the whispers. He had walked the wrong path once, but perhaps, just perhaps, there was still another way. Perhaps, if he fought, if he truly fought, he could break the cycle. The mist shivered around him as if it knew his thoughts. And it laughed. Jorund stood at the edge of the mist, his fingers curling around the handle of his axe. The laughter of the mist echoed in his ears, slithering into his mind like creeping vines. He could feel its grip tightening around his thoughts, whispering to him that resistance was futile. But something inside him burned. A part of him refused to fade, refused to let the mist consume him entirely. He had watched too many warriors before him become nothing more than smiling husks, welcoming the lost into an eternal trap. He would not be one of them. The young warrior who had arrived days before, the one with the hesitant step and cautious eyes, was beginning to notice the same things Jorund had once questioned. He had asked why no one left, why no one aged, and soon he would try to run just as Jorund had. Jorund would not let him suffer the same fate. That night, as the village feasted, Jorund sat beside the newcomer. The young man's name was Askell, a raider from a distant shore, just as Jorund had been. He ate with hunger, but his eyes constantly flicked toward the mist, as though testing its reach. Jorund leaned closer. "You are thinking of leaving." Askell's shoulders tensed. He glanced at the others. None seemed to be paying them any mind. "I do not belong here." Jorund took a slow sip of his mead. "None of us do." Askell narrowed his eyes. Then why do you stay? Jorund exhaled, the weight of centuries pressing against him. Because the mist does not let us go. Askell looked at him, confusion flickering across his face. That cannot be true. You are warriors. You are Vikings. What force could hold you? Jorund hesitated. Have you heard them yet? The whispers? Askell froze, his expression darkening. He had heard them. Jorund lowered his voice. They are not just voices. They are the ones who did not accept their fate. They became something worse. Askell swallowed hard, glancing at the smiling villagers around them. Then how do we fight? Jorund clenched his jaw. That was the question he had asked himself for so long. And now, at last, he thought he might have an answer. We must reach the edge of the mist, he said, and we must face what waits beyond. Askell gripped the hilt of his sword. When? Jorund looked to the mist. It shuddered as if it had heard them. The village slept, but the mist never did. It hung heavy around the houses, shifting like a living thing, waiting, watching. Jorund and Askell moved quietly, their steps slow and deliberate. The village gate was only a few yards ahead. Jorund felt the weight of unseen eyes pressing down on him. He knew the villagers were aware of their movement, even if they did not show it. Then, as they stepped beyond the last house, the mist thickened. The whispers began. Jorund, you belong here. Askell, do not leave. Jorund gritted his teeth and pressed forward. Askell followed, his grip white-knuckled around his sword. Then the shapes began to form. Dark figures moved within the mist, half-seen horrors with hollow eyes and twisted faces. They reached out with claw-like hands, their mouths stretching wide in silent screams. The ones who did not accept, Jorund murmured. The creatures lunged. Jorund swung his axe, but once again it passed through them like air. The mist figures swirled around them, clawing at their minds more than their flesh. Jorund's vision blurred. He saw himself in the village again, laughing, drinking, giving in. He roared, shaking off the illusion. Run! They sprinted through the mist, the whispers turning to shrieks. The figures pursued them, shifting through the fog like wraiths. The mist thickened, trying to pull them back, trying to drag them down. Then suddenly, a break. A sliver of darkness beyond the mist. A gap. Jorund didn't hesitate. He grabbed Askell and shoved him forward. Go! Askell stumbled, his body half falling into the void beyond the mist. He turned back, his eyes wide with realization. Jorund, come! Jorund stepped forward, and the mist screamed. A force slammed into him, unseen but powerful. He fell to his knees, his axe slipping from his fingers. The whispers turned into a deafening roar. You cannot leave. You are ours. Pain lanced through his skull. Images flooded his mind. The village, the endless feast, the smiling faces, his own face. He had been here too long. Jorund clenched his fists. Number. He would not fade. He would not become one of them. With the last of his strength, he forced himself to his feet and threw himself toward the gap. The mist howled. And then suddenly, there was nothing but silence. Jorund hit the ground hard, gasping. The air was cold, real. The mist was gone. Askell knelt beside him, his breath ragged. We made it. Jorund looked around. The land was unfamiliar, but it was real. Trees swayed in the wind. The sky stretched vast above them. They were free. Jorund turned back toward the mist. It loomed behind them, silent now, but waiting. And within it, far in the distance, figures stood watching. Not all of them had escaped. Jorund's grip tightened on his axe. One day, he would return, and he would set them all free.